before I got my diagnosis, Seth and I had gone for a race around Creve Lake out in St. Louis, and a 4-mile run. And I beat him handily by like 4 minutes. And so it comes to find out the next week that he got beat by a man who like had no blood.
He was tired, a little, not his usual wound up self. But we just kind of did things like usual. But he just slept a lot and just like, oh no, I'm just tired all the time. So we're like, why aren't you going to bed? Just figured he's up playing around, who knows what.
Fever around 5:30 every single day, p.m. And I'd be in bed by 7, I'd be asleep, and then I would have like a full night sweat. So 2 o'clock in the morning, wake up and it's like someone just like threw a bucket of water on you. And I'd get up and I'm like, what the fuck? This happens every day. And then I'd go back to bed, wake up, and I'd make 2 pots of coffee. I drank 2 pots of coffee a day. That would get me to about 2 p.m. And then I would basically crash and sort of like start going downhill.
He did a thing called the Uber Man in college, which is where you do 6 20-minute naps a day. Because he's the kind of guy who is such a go-getter that he felt like he needed 22 hours in the day in order to get all the shit done that he was trying to do with his life, right? So I kind of saw this shift in him over a couple months from being just, off the wall with energy and excitement, enthusiasm about everything, to just sort of bottoming out entirely.
Seth and I were seeing this happen, and both of us were trying to figure out what the fuck was happening. So we had a lot of chats during that time about like, Seth revealed to me shortly after I told him about the diagnosis that what he thought was happening is since we had some success with Quadrupus, that we were essentially having a sort of success trap, right? Which is like, he's like, I thought maybe you just weren't into it anymore, after we kind of made it enough, so to speak. It was weirdly a relief for him and for me, actually, that it was cancer in a really weird way. Because it's like, at least theoretically, cancer is the sort of thing that you can cure, right? Apathy or just a growing disinterest with what you're doing with your life doesn't really, like, you can't just turn that back around, right? There's no chemotherapy for that sort of thing. Every time they did a scan or something, it was just a worse and worse thing. They're like, okay, it's lymphoma, and that's good. Like, lymphoma is like one of the best ones to get. Like, besides testicular, if you can go for cancer, like, it's just testicular, but if you can't get that one, get lymphoma. Call my dad. He was like, hey, what's going on? What'd you find out? And I was like, so I have cancer. And he was like, what? And then I started crying, and then he was crying, and then we were laughing about it. I was like, this is fucking dumb.
We're normally a very jovial family. Just everybody's laughing and doing stuff, and everything's good. Always looking at the bright side. But that was a day that we just were all silent.
You can't even imagine dealing with cancer with your kid or a loved one. Period. And so it makes your heart heavy. And I'll never forget the day that he called, that I was getting dog food and throwing it in the trunk of the car. And he said, Mom, I got back from the doctor and said I don't have an infection, I have cancer.
And statistically, if it's a lymphoma, it's Hodgkin's, and like that's curable almost all the time. I thought, well, okay, you know, we can deal with this. And, you know, so we do all of this stuff here to get a diagnosis, and then it comes back and it's not Hodgkin's. And then I go to talk to the pathologist, who is a friend of mine, who bursts into tears because she's looking at the specimen under the microscope, and she just looked at me and she said, "This is really bad."
So they did the biopsy, and they're like, okay, it's T-cell rich large B-cell lymphoma. I'm like, what the fuck does that mean? I don't know what that means. They're like, well, it's non-Hodgkin's, so it's harder to cure. And they're like, when did you start feeling sick? And I was like, I don't know, June. And they were like, really? Okay, so they're like, this must be really aggressive, so we're gonna do a PET scan and just see what's going on. Do a PET scan, and I get diagnosed at stage 4B. So there's no 5, right? You're supposed to be dead after 4. So they actually didn't know how the fuck I was walking around. Because I was essentially, on the inside, I was essentially more cancer than human at that point.
They sort of started to kind of fade away. They stopped participating in as many events, and, you know, Sam just wasn't making public appearances, as one might say. It was rare to see him even as a friend during that time. I really fell out of touch with him. I remember we texted him once in a while and just said, is there anything we can do for you? Is there any way that we can come visit you? And for the most part, you know, he always seemed to want to be solo or on his own or whatever, so. I don't know, he didn't want people focusing on the illness. And I think being around people was too hard because everybody wanted to focus on the illness. Everybody wanted to talk about what was wrong with you instead of what's right with you. You know, when people saw him, they would say, how are you? Instead of saying, what are you up to? What are you working on? You know, what's good? What's new? Sam is one of the best people that I know, and one of the people who deserves to go through something like that the least. And to realize he was about to go through the biggest struggle of his life was really hard for me to hear and to deal with. And I honestly just didn't know what to do. I just got off the phone and cried.
Whenever I have a summer intern, on their first day in, their first hour there, I call them into my office and I sit them down and I say, tell me what you want to get out of this experience. Every answer can be cataloged into make my resume look better, make me get the job I want, make me get the next internship I want. So it's all this self-serving kind of move the needle professionally or academically. When I sat Sam down and I said, what do you want to get out of this experience? No hesitation, no pause, he said, I want what I do here to matter. So Sam was the first intern I ever had that I gave full-on real projects to that I would have assigned my staff to normally, and he produced amazing things.
I was in the middle of grad school, so I've been in grad school for 2 years, or 2.5 years. And then Sam called me and was like, hey, I've got lymphoma. And I was like, okay. I process things kind of differently than other people, and especially for me, because I was studying cancer biology, and it's a thing that I understand on a very fundamental level. And so my first response was basically I just left the lab. I was at work, and I just left the lab, went home, and started just reading up the research on that particular kind of lymphoma that I had, because I needed to, for me to process a thing, I need to understand it.
I think he felt a little one off because everybody, the two brothers were here, and he felt a little distant, and I think that bothered him a little bit. But I would always make sure I kept him, we've got the appointment today. Do you have any questions? He would be like, have you thought about, ask them if they've thought about this one protein on the CD19. And I'm like, okay, so then I'd read about it because I don't know these things. And then I'd report into the doctor, and she's like, that's very interesting. Nobody's ever asked that.
With this illness, it can impinge where you go. They want him to stay close by for X amount of days, and he was always want to go to conferences in California and all this stuff, and to have to take a step back from that and say, hey, I gotta take care of myself. His family, they're all so awesome. I mean, they're all like, let's get you better, and we're gonna push this back, and we'll go and we'll report back to you and stuff. You can just tell the connection that they all have, and it's really great to have that support, especially during that time. So.
This was at the same time that I was kind of frustrated with a lot of things that were going on in grad school, and but not very far away from being done. And so then I just told Sam, I was like, look, you guys are still doing this butterscotch thing, and I know you're going to keep on doing it. No matter what, when I'm done with my PhD, I want to go actually just work with you guys. The obvious future step, the future goal of being able to be with family everywhere, where that was something I was like, oh, I could do that at any time, we've got decades to make that work. And all of a sudden it was like, maybe not. So we should do, focus on the thing that was actually important. And so I just told Sam, I was like, all right, I'm going to do this, but if you want me to just drop what I'm doing now and just join Butterscotch, I'm like, I would do that without even looking back. And he was like, fuck no, finish your PhD.
David and I luckily have availability to do deep dive on internet research into journals and research publications and that kind of stuff that the general public doesn't get to see. And so we would come armed with all sorts of questions, and have you read this study, and what about this?
Julie has medical expertise too, so they were quite a team with Julie down there reporting everything to David, and David in 2 weeks becoming a better oncologist than Sam's oncologist and figuring out what needed to be done.
As we got more and more information, it pushed me to start digging. However, before I could do that, I needed to know what I was dealing with. We took Sam to Des Moines to where we thought he would be treated, and they said he's too sick. This is too complicated. He's got a 7% chance of survival, and we won't treat him. You have to take him someplace else. So we were all in this mindset that, it's over.
Luckily, it happens to be the case that St. Louis has one of the best lymphoma centers in the country.
So then we get the test result the next day, and none of us want to hear it. And thankfully, when the doctor came in, the very first thing she said was, I've got good news. But then she went on to say, look, he's so sick that we have to start treatment tomorrow. Because if we don't, I'm not sure he's going to make it another couple weeks. So that's how sick he was. David lost a brother when he was 13, and I lost a brother when I was 19, and my brother was only 21. So there was that memory and the dread of thinking, oh my God, I hope these guys don't have to go through that, because that nearly killed us. When my brother died, it was a sudden death, and it happened right in front of the house. Everybody saw it. It was just very traumatic. Going through that was terrible, to lose my brother, but it was more terrible watching my father. I have this distinct memory of lying on the couch because I was scared to sleep in my room because my brother was gone. And, listening to my father just wailing. I remember laying there and thinking, I hope I never have to. I hope I never have to go through that. And so I was thinking about that. But then I start rationalizing, of course, saying, you know what? I'm not the only person that's had to deal with this. And I started, thinking about all these people in Syria losing their kids. I started thinking about all the trauma all over the world, all the parents that have lost a child. Sam was still here. So I thought, okay, I can't do this. This is not how this can go for me. I can't be waiting for this to happen.
You can't live in fear about all that. You have to live your life and just say, this is what I've been dealt and this is how we're going to play it out. When somebody has some reason to live, and whatever that reason is, it can be, family or loved ones, it just really motivates you to get through all the stuff you have to get through. And Sam's not kind of a sad sap anyway. He's very, positive kind of a person.
Of course, every parent says, oh, my kid's so special, but it isn't it. I mean, the guy is, and he always was. He was a Pied Piper. When he was the tiniest child, he just drew people to him like moths to a flame. I mean, everybody wanted to be around Sam, and that's the way he was in high school and in college, and everybody just adored him because he's an adorable person. And I don't take credit for that. That's him.
We sat down on the whiteboard and we pull up the game we were working on before, which is a game called Extreme Sloth Cycling. And it was just pure ridiculousness. And part of it was born out of the fact that we couldn't figure out what to do next after Quadrupus. During that time, I was just kind of tanking. And so we're like, let's just make this like kind of ridiculous one-off game. It'll be free, mobile thing. Everyone's gonna forget about it in a year. And then I popped open Game Maker, and I can still code okay. And so I just had an idea, and I was like, I think I want to build something else. I started coding up this thing, which was essentially like a Roomba picking up leaves. And after you picked up 10 leaves, they would turn into sandals. And Seth came by in the morning expecting to work on sloth cycling. And I just sat him down, and my selling pitch was, sloth cycling is not the game that I want to make before I die. Like, I can't have this basically be the last thing that I did, was make this stupid 2D runner. Sorry, like, no one's going to remember this. I want to make something someone's going to, like, remember that might actually impact them. And then I showed him this prototype of this Roomba picking up leaves. And, I mean, I'm sure it was the cancer card, right? But, like, he was just all on board. He was like, all right, let's do it.
I'll never forget when Seth called me and told me that they were doing this new game. And Sam said the most tragic thing to me. He said, we've been working on this game called Sloth Cycling. He said, Sam just looked at me and said, I can't have this be the last thing I do before I die. I have to do something that matters. Is this really something that matters? I mean, I couldn't help but think this. And I talked to Seth about this later, and he goes, Dad, look, we make people really happy with these games. And who gets to say that? Who gets to say they do something every day that makes thousands of people happy?
the scale of this game is so huge and the technical requirements so beyond our capabilities at that point. It was basically a completely insane project to undertake. And we did it anyways because the cancer basically pushed me from being like, okay, it's okay to like sort of, you know, cut your teeth and just make a few of these games to get an idea of what's happening. We'd already finished that process, that part of the game making process. And what we really needed to do at that point was make something that mattered. That's how Crashlands ended up coming to be. It was essentially, here's a Roomba picking up some leaves and they turn into sandals. Also, I have cancer, let's make something bigger and more meaningful.